Shame can limit our lives and interfere with our ability to be our authentic self. Find out how we can release ourselves from toxic shame next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst, said, "Shame is the swampland of the soul." Tonight, we're taking shame out of the dark where it grows best and shedding some light on it so that we can get some ideas about how to let go of our shame baggage. You can be a part of tonight's conversation by calling the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout tonight's show. My guest tonight is Casey Ladd, the Director of Child and Family Services at the Human Development Center, who's provided training for helping professionals on the topic of shame. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Casey. And so let's start with, what is this thing called shame?
Well, we first have to distinguish what you're talking about as toxic shame from what we would say is just healthy shame. Shame, we see, comes into our interpersonal lives between about 15 and 30 months. And it is that felt experience that somebody that I'm really bonded to and connected to is disappointed in me. So shame is an interpersonally activated human emotion, and it is kind of a foundational building block for what we would say is really good, healthy humility. And that's very different from toxic shame.
So we want a little bit of that kind of shame then.
Well, I don't know I think that it can be, it's useful. There's a purpose that we would say that it serves for us. But like any of our emotions, it's not something that's good or bad, or our psychological state. It's not something that is certainly desirable, because it's not something that's necessarily a pleasant emotion to have. But it is about learning how to use it in healthy relationships. But what we deal with oftentimes with our clients, as you know, Carolyn, is that we're really trying to help them disinternalize that toxic shame.
And so explain how toxic shame is different from sort of the regular good old shame.
Well, I think that, so we would say that as human beings, that I might feel embarrassed, I might feel, I might make a mistake, I might be giving a speech or playing, this happened to me, playing a piano recital and forgetting my piece in the middle. And so there was that kind of embarrassment and that shame, and then we can rebound from that. What the toxic shame is more of, and I think of this as with our highly chronically stressed families, that children's needs and feelings oftentimes really tax the relationship that the child has with adult caregivers, and the adult's response is to really shame the child, to shame the toddler, the child, the adolescent, the adult, for being human. And so this might be that a child's expressing what we would say is normal, healthy emotion, and that the shame gets attached to that, and the shame gets attached to the needs of needing love, of reaching out.
So that when I have these needs of I need you to love me, if I start attaching shame to that based on my caregiver's reaction to me, is how that begins to turn toxic.
And when I was first learning about this dynamic and learning about it as a therapist was in the 80s. And I remember I was around Lake of the Isles in the Twin Cities, and there was a 5-year-old little boy who was trying to learn how to roller skate, and his mom was with him, and he fell and he scraped his knees, and he was crying. And this mother was just furious with him, and she said, it's like, quit being such a crybaby. And I felt angry with her and probably wanted to shame her. And instead I could say to the little boy, oh, when we fall down and scrape our knees, it's hard and it's scary, and try to kind of, I think, mitigate some of that shame message that he was getting from his mom, that there was something wrong with him or defective about him because he was scared.
And attaching then shame to sort of normal feelings is when we get toxic shame.
That's right.
Then.
That's right.
And so are there certain people who are more prone to toxic shame? Are there certain temperaments that are more prone to experiencing shame and attaching to it in a toxic way?
Well, I would say that interesting question. That the child, I think, who's more highly sensitive, who is perhaps has a more difficult time forming and maintaining that kind of that bond or that connection, may be a child who is going to have that worry or that fear about that I'm basically not okay and I'm unlovable. We see that the origins of that toxic shame really come in family systems where there are demands for perfection, where there is overt, so really clear abuse, that's emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, that those are children who are really coming with a burden into their childhood and adolescence and adulthood with what we think of as this internalized shame-based belief. So that now the assault lives within them.
So that's so interesting, because I feel like you just named two different ends of the spectrum, sort of the abuse survivors on the one hand, and then this, because the other group that you named are sort of this highly perfectionistic, or families who tend to be perfectionistic in their demands of behavior. Mm-hmm. And so talk a little bit about how perfectionistic demands work within the realm of toxic shame.
So we would say that in the family where the expectations that the parent has, that I need or I want the child to act or perform a certain way, sometimes we see that shame happen because the parents don't have very realistic expectations about what this age of a child could and should do. And so sometimes the shame comes because the parent developmentally is expecting something that the child can't actually do, like pour a glass of milk at age 3 without spilling it. Now in some families, the kid spills it, the parent gets a little upset, say, oh no, we have to clean it up. But the child doesn't feel like they're defective or there's something wrong with them. In families where we see the demand for perfection, it is as if that the child is constantly feeling the pressure of having to perform and having to please the parent.
Or that their lovability is dependent on this A+ performance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that's what gets attached, and that's where you have the growth of the toxic shame.
That's
then.
right.
I'm only deserving if I perform at this level.
That's right. And so we will see those kids that in the world they look very, very successful, and then they make a mistake, or they fail to get the A. And they collapse inside because now the assault is I'm stupid, there's something, wrong that I've disappointed my mom or dad, and that they can't maintain the connection in a way that is an acceptance of our limitations.
You talked a little bit about then how smaller kids, toddlers, begin to then carry this, especially where you were describing in abuse, the burden of this into adolescence and then into adulthood. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about sort of adults who are walking around with this huge, I describe it as it's the shame that walks into the door first, and leads the way for the person.
And that it's believed that shame is a derivative of the word to cover and hiding. And little kids are great because when they're experiencing their shame, they might say something like, "Don't look at me," or that they'll physically try to hide. As adults, I think that there's oftentimes that not wanting to be seen, and that we have there's a public self and then there's a private self, and that there's tremendous discrepancy oftentimes for people who really carry that burden of a lot of those shame-based beliefs. And
that if you knew who I really was,
absolutely,
then you would judge me negatively.
That you would view me as being defective, as unlovable, and and so we would see, and that we see with adults that for adults who are really struggling with chemicals or abusive behavior, or as we said, the perfectionism, that we see the common denominator in that addictive, abusive, perfectionistic behavior are these shame-based beliefs that really assault the personhood of the clients that we work with.
Talk a little bit sort of about cultural variables too, that there are certain, I think even if we take a look at, is it okay to be gay in our community, and the way shame has been often in some cultures attached to being gay, but what role then does our culture play in sort of highlighting maybe some or underlining or reinforcing some of this toxic shame?
Well, I think every family and every culture has a certain set of principles about what allows you to belong, what allows you to be, part of us or in this family or in this community. And it can be about, that we would say that, in some families it's about your, belief, or, whether you do or don't accept the religious kind of principles of the family that you were born into, or that there's an expectation that in order to belong you have to be a certain way, and that we would say that shame is the fate worse than death, and that if you don't kind of participate and belong in this community, then shame is a dynamic that we use to threaten you with kind of banishment. And certainly that we would see that whether it was being gay, or for some, I think that growing up, some of us remember that, oh my goodness, if you were a Protestant and you married a Catholic, that there was like shame associated with that because it was a violation of what it meant to belong. So
here's a great question that sort of dovetails on this topic. A woman from Beaver Bay says, "How do you get over the shame of an abortion?" So I think this is getting exactly what we're talking about. But what would you say to her?
What I would say to her is that that we want to begin to look at shame versus healthy guilt, and that the shame really is that that I'm unlovable because I've made this choice and that I've done something that that we do see that times that kind of very difficult kind of ability to accept that I made this choice. And shame really lives and thrives in isolation. And so the being able to that whenever we're talking about those events in our lives that really activate that shame, it's the process of being able to turn towards another.
So the more we keep it secret,
the more it flourishes, and the more that I think it gets, that it really gets a grip on, and I think of it as
takes on a life of its own.
And that I've described it to clients, it's like a malignancy that's growing on our soul, and that it's a soul wound. And the process of of loosening the grip on that soul is about being able to reach out. And it sounds hokey, but it's really about reaching out for connection, reaching out for love. And that sometimes people will reach out for, that it's about being able to say that I deserve to be comforted. And that it's paradoxical, because in the shame, what we want to do is to hide. And in what we talk about, that in the healing process, it's really about being open to say that this is who I am, this is what I've done, and can you still accept and love me? It really, when we look at the 12 steps of AA, that it's that process of moving from toxic shame to healthy guilt.
And so then, also I think for this woman in Beaver Bay, and to many people who've had not just who've made the choice to have an abortion, but who just feel immobilized by the shame they have. There's a part about self-forgiveness also in that.
And if we think about that, the way that we get the shame is because somebody that we valued in another relationship has in some ways looked at us with disgust or disdain. And so it's difficult for us to kind of reverse that, to be able to move towards people and to reach out. And so I think that the self-forgiveness that we eventually want, I think oftentimes comes through some interpersonal experience. Now, for some people, that really is an experience that they have with God or in their kind of belief system. It's, the story of the prodigal son is that he was, he did all kinds of things that really were in a violation of what it meant to belong to his family. And he had that moment that wasn't like, I deserve to go back and be my father's son, but it was like, I deserve to go back and at least be a servant in my father's house. That's where you see the healthy humility, where he can begin to move towards. And then in the story, that we have this lovely story in Scripture that he's embraced and he's forgiven. And yet the challenge then is, how is it that I can receive this love and this forgiveness and let it do battle with that shame that's inside of me, so I really can be free from it? And I don't know about free from it, but that I become more skillful in managing it when it gets activated.
And so I like what you said, because I think that we often think of, I want to go and I want to fix this thing and I want to get rid of it, and then maybe it feels like it does go away for a little while, and all of a sudden 6 months down the road, we're having this emotional reaction that's just like we never did all of that work on ourselves. And so what you're saying is, well, it might get activated from time to time, but don't despair over that fact. You can still keep moving forward, and you now have a way of moving yourself forward from that place, rather than just staying stuck in that place all of the time.
That's right. And that it is, I think, the work of being able to kind of begin to recognize, how did that toxic shame enter my life interpersonally? Because as an adult now, it is my job to battle, because I think that the toxic shame lies to us about who we are. It does not reveal the truth.
Yes. Here's a good question. A man from Duluth said, is it possible to get over self-inflicted shame as it interferes with happiness?
Absolutely. And I don't know, I would say to him that we sometimes then shame ourselves because we carry this shame. That I think of it as, and
as if the shame itself isn't bad enough. Now we're going to shame ourselves for feeling shame.
I've been studying and doing workshops nationally about shame since the 80s, and I came to realize that there are those times when I could feel that mean voice inside giving that feedback about, that I was stupid, or I'd made a mistake, or I couldn't stand to face somebody, and it was like, wait a minute, that's that shame that's lying to me, and I don't have to, and I really have to learn how to develop that more nurturing. What I would say is, like, what would this man say to someone he loves dearly who had made a mistake? And because he has the ability to be able to give it to other, and it's the process about, how do I now give it to myself? And sometimes we need to experience it in relationships with, whether it's good friends, or whether it's with a pastor, or whether it's with a AA sponsor, or or to really do that internal work through journaling, to really recognize the voice of shame so that you can become more aware of it, so that we can begin to really do that internal battle with it.
I like what you just said, that recognize the voice of shame. And so if there's somebody out in the audience right now who doesn't even know what that means, like
Yes.
what are the beginning steps of how we actually do recognize the voice of shame?
Because it comes into our lives before we have language. So it's this wordless, punitive self-consciousness that is like this kind of state that we begin to collapse into. And so if you have that feeling about, I wish I could be invisible, I wish I could disappear, I can't stand, having another be able to see my humanness, or that sometimes what we'll see, especially I think with so many of our young people, when they talk about getting dissed, they got dissed, and that activates rage. That rage is like a primitive defense against feeling the shame, and then it's like, I want to shame you back. So when we look at is that feeling about wanting to hide, wanting to disappear, wanting to not be seen, or the opposite, it's that I want to inflict and shame you and make you feel badly about yourself. That those are some of the indications that I'm in a shame spiral, and that and really, as I've said to you before, that one of the things as a family therapist that I get concerned about is this notion about, we've really been trained to say that we have to get our feelings out. And what I want to say is that if I'm in a shame state, I am not safe to get my feelings out, because what's going to come out is something that likely is going to have you feeling that the intent is to make you feel badly about yourself. And that's the form of emotional abuse. And that's the form of kind of carrying that abuse forward. And so it's having to learn how to recognize I'm dangerous, and that I need to step back and not be allowing that voice of shame in me to now come out in our connection.
So number one, kind of recognizing when you're in that shame spiral, and what you talked about is that sense of when you want to hide, when you want to withdraw, and maybe paying attention to physically what it feels like in your body.
That's right.
At that point in time. And so now that I'm good at recognizing that feeling, what's the next thing that I do then?
I think that one of the things that it's important is try not to be too introspective, because that when we're in those shame states, and when we're introspective, we're asking, that's like, why is this happening? Why am I doing this? That it can just lead us down to the rabbit hole. So one of the things that we'll look at is like, how is it that I can get my eyes turned away from the self, and that I can begin noticing the things in the here and now that connect me to others, connect me to beauty. So it can be music, it can be dance, it can be movement, it can be...
And connect me to the here and now, maybe too.
Exactly.
That shame experience really is, because what you're saying is that toxic shame is not coming from 2015.
Right.
That toxic shame is coming from
way back,
a different place.
Right.
We are getting close to running out of time here, which is amazing, because I think you and I could just spend the rest of the evening, but we'd probably need a glass of wine or something in order to be conned into doing that. So. What would you say are some parting words for the viewing audience about letting go of toxic shame?
I invite all of us to try to remember the persons who have been on our life journey, who, if we came into a room and they saw us, they delighted in us. And because our brains are so I think that we remember the people who did more of the harm and the shame to us. And the more we can begin to really cultivate and remember with gratitude the people who loved us and the people who did nurture us, and it might be teachers or coaches or our friend's mother, and then to really have some of the gratitude and to begin seeing ourselves through their eyes in a really kind of gentle, loving way.
How beautiful. How beautiful. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you for joining the conversation. So those people who recognize the goodness in us, they see our authentic self and they think that's okay. I think that's kind of what Casey's been talking with us about, and that it's okay for us to recognize that maybe they've got something going there, maybe they're right, maybe we actually are okay. Thanks so much for joining the discussion. And don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. And join us again next week when we'll be talking about helping families live with mental illness. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.